Iron Maiden albums ranked. When ranking Iron Maiden albums, perhaps the most striking thing is that they succeeded despite changing lead singers on 3 separate occasions. 17. The X Factor, 1995. Blaze Bayley, on his first Iron Maiden album, tried in vain to fill the large shoes vacated by Bruce Dickinson. He got little help from band leader Steve Harris, who came up with a bunch of stubbornly overwrought tunes. What's more, longtime producer Martin Birch had just retired, forcing Harris to cope on his own. 16. Virtual 11, 1998. Marginally better than its predecessor, Virtual 11 avoided similar production doldrums but not the lack of songwriting inspiration. It also drew a blank with Americans, who missed the title soccer reference. Having said all that, Virtual 11 at least produced a classic-sounding Maiden epic in The Klansman. Bailey's departure, however, was inevitable. 15. No Prayer for the Dying, 1990. Iron Maiden's first album with guitarist Jan Ikshas was a calculated effort to strip down the band's sound following the conceptual excesses of Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. It ended up as a lazy, uninspired collection, devoid of long-term keepers except for Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, and Steve Harris had to twist Bruce Dickinson's arm to keep that off his solo record. 14. Dance of Death, 2003. Something of a come-down, Dance of Death followed the frenzied excitement awaiting Iron Maiden's reunion with Dickinson and guitarist Adrian Smith, 3 years earlier. But it was still an embarrassment of riches by any definition. Wildest Dreams and Rainmaker were a knockout 1-2 punch, and the bombastic Paskendale may well be their absolute finest hour of the third millennium. 13. The Final Frontier, 2010. Another reminder of Iron Maiden's staying power, The Final Frontier arrived an entire decade after their return to glory as a sextet. And it was quintessential Maiden, with hardly a song dipping below the 5-minute mark and several new age epics, Isle of Avalon, The Man Who Would Be King, etc. that were as grand as those classics from 2 decades before. 12. Fear of the Dark, 1992. Iron Maiden wrapped up the first Bruce Dickinson era with a bang, somehow managing to appease their increasingly demanding fans while trying out a few new tricks. The title track may have been vintage Maiden, through and through, but Wasting Love was a bona fide ballad, and topical subjects largely replaced castle metal fantasy. 11. A Matter of Life and Death, 2006. Iron Maiden flirted with conceptual continuity, and their recurring themes of religion, war and, yes, life and death arguably made this the band's most consistent third millennium LP. So much so, that Iron Maiden was emboldened to perform the album in its entirety on their subsequent tour, and, even more amazingly, they encountered precious little resistance from fans. 10. Brave New World, 2000. A musical omnibus, Brave New World evokes memories of those beloved 80s LPs while gazing ever forward, into the future. The returning Dickinson and Smith elevated Harris, Jazz and Murray to new heights during moments like the title track, which embraced promising days ahead, and Blood Brothers, which appropriately focused on the renewed bonds of past fellowship. 9. Somewhere in Time, 1986. Worn out after the record-breaking World Slavery Tour, Iron Maiden found it hard to match recent triumphs again. Steve Harris' songs were relatively dependable, but he tempted fans' wrath by experimenting with guitar synths, and Bruce Dickinson was a disappointing no-show on the songwriting front. Luckily, Adrian Smith stepped up with Wasted Years. 8. Book of Souls, 2015. Conceived in a whole new way, there's as much gumption here as in anything Iron Maiden has done. The results offer much to thrill die-hard fans, but just as much to challenge their preconceived notions. 7. Senjutsu, 2021. Traveling from South America to East Asia, while refining, and apparently perfecting, the approach taken on Book of Souls, Steve Harris seems to have fulfilled his ambition of turning Maiden into a no-holds-barred prog band, albeit with a taste for riffs and melodies that remain specifically theirs. Blue-collar Genesis, if you will, delivered with intricacy and a spirit of unity. The quick stings of a Stratego and Days of Future Past make clear they remember where they came from, while the limelight is clearly on Harris' epic closing trio, Death of the Celts, The Parchment and Hell on Earth. 6. Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, 1988. The last LP from Iron Maiden's classic 80s lineup, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son was a progressive and conceptual tour de force, challenging listeners with cryptic musings on good and evil, as well as, gulp, synthesizers. Chief songwriters Harris, Dickinson, and Smith collaborated like never before, as if knowing they wouldn't have another opportunity for more than a decade. 5. Iron Maiden, 1980. This debut was slowed by production challenges and songwriting inconsistencies. But at their best, headbangers like Prowler and Iron Maiden, the intricate Phantom of the Opera, or the rousing Running Free, there's no doubting Iron Maiden's future renown. Besides, the LP's significance far outweighs any human flaws, as it became a bellwether for the new wave of British heavy metal. 4. Killers, 1981. Iron Maiden sold their first album Sonic Riddles with help from producer Martin Birch, who gave shape to Steve Harris' creative vision on favorites like Rothschild, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and the title track. Sadly, this also proved to be their last LP with Paul Di'Anno. He made way for Bruce Dickinson later that year, but not before earning a permanent spot in the hearts of many fans. 3. Peace of Mind, 1983. Iron Maiden consolidated their classic lineup, with the newly arrived Nico McBrain making an immediate impact on the blistering Where Eagles Dare, Dickinson proving his songwriting mettle on Revelations, and Harris delivering the goods, as usual, on The Trooper, Dune, and Flight of Icarus, in partnership with Adrian Smith. 2. Power Slave, 1984. No album epitomizes Iron Maiden at their peak quite like Power Slave, with its memorable Egyptian imagery courtesy of designer Derek Riggs. Highlights included heavy metal staples like Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight, and the 13-minute Colossus, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. 1. The Number of the Beast, 1982. Iron Maiden's definitive album established the standard by which all of their later efforts are still measured. Between the controversial title track's occult fascinations, the chart-climbing immediacy of Run to the Hills, the patented gallop of Hallowed Be Thy Name, and deeper cuts that would qualify as all-time classics for anyone else, there's simply no topping Number of the Beast.